updates about our stewardship campaign for the year, kind of where we're looking at ending the year and ways that you could help us end the year strong. So you might remember that our stewardship pledge goal this year was $680,000. To date, we've received $550,401 in pledges for 2025. That's about $129,000 less than we had as our target, but we are still actively receiving pledges. In fact, several came in today, so we know that we are getting closer to hitting that target. We currently have approximately $87,000 in giving, either in folks who pledged last year and have not yet pledged for this coming year, or people who have recurring gifts set up in our giving system. And we know that if they're willing to make a pledge, which allows us to count that gift toward our annual budget, we will be significantly closer to that $680,000 threshold. To date, we've received about we've hit about 81% of our target for the year. And the reason that that's significant is twofold. First, last year, with more pledgers, we actually had less funds pledged. So we've passed our pledge amount from last year by about 4.5%, almost 5%, with fewer pledgers. And the reason that's significant is because it shows that we have folk who are growing their investment in the ministries of the life of our church. And that's something worth giving lots of thanks for. A couple of other brief financial updates for us. We anticipate receiving about $128,000 in capital reimbursement from initial funds expended as a part of our affordable housing development. That will be coming now that the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, has been signed with our development partners. And we anticipate that if everyone who pledged this year fulfills their pledge by the end of the year, while we will not end with a $40,000 surplus like we did last year, we are far more likely to end the year in the black than we initially anticipated at the beginning of the year when we budgeted a $100,000 deficit. All of these signs point to continued growth in the stewardship and financial generosity of our congregation, and for that, for you, and for all the folks who've invested in our ministries, we give thanks. The final update that I'll share before I invite our treasurer, Lee, to come and share her report is that you may remember when we began construction in the building in July of this year, that one of our goals in beginning to valve off or turn off certain spaces in the building that we were no longer going to occupy was to net some savings in ongoing utility costs and maintenance costs in the building. And I am very much excited to say that we've seen about a 6.5% reduction in energy consumption. We've seen about a 4.5% reduction in water consumption, all of which nets us long-term and ongoing savings as we're continuing to occupy this building in the period between now and when we anticipate the housing will be built sometime in 2027 or 2028. I'm going to turn it over to Lee, and thank you all for being here today.
Hello? Oh, I think that worked. Okay, thank you so much, Kyle. Good morning, everyone, and to everyone that might be joining us virtually. Thank you so much for coming to this presentation on church finances. I know everyone has a lot of things going on in December, so we really appreciate you coming. Becky was passing out a handout. Is there anyone that didn't receive a handout? Okay. So I'm Lee Bullis. I am our treasurer, so I am the layperson responsible for the oversight of church finances. I sign the checks, and in this role, I serve on our church council, and I chair our budget and operations committee. So our committee is very dedicated and thoughtful, so I just want to mention everyone on the committee, Darren Fenwick, Becky Eager, Cheryl Lammy, David Renfro, Jean Rich, Aaron Cirilla, and our financial secretary, Lynn Waters. And Sarah has also joined our committee as our pastoral intern to kind of see what we're doing as a committee. And then the committee works closely with our external accountant, Julie Hansen, from Nonprofit Accounting Solutions. So the purpose of today's presentation is to provide an update on our finances and then a little bit about our budget. So to begin with, I would like to review our current financial picture. So I'm going to be speaking from the handout if you want to follow along. So the handout is only about our operating budget, which is our day-to-day expenses and kind of what the church spends to keep us going. So in 2024, we had budgeted to receive $938,000 in revenue, to spend $1,038,000 in expenses, with a deficit of $100,000. So unfortunately, the latest numbers I have are from October. It normally takes a week or two to tally everything at the end of the month. So we're like a couple days probably from having the November financials ready. So apologies. I know it's not great to be able to see things from a couple months ago, but this is what we have. So as of October 31st, we had revenue of $815,000. By this point in the year, we had budgeted to receive revenue of $769,000, so we're doing better than budget. As you can see from our revenue pie chart, we have two main sources of revenue. So the main is contributions, which is this purplish color, and then 20% comes from facilities, so these are tenants. 7% is transfers from restrictions. This is an accounting term. So this is if you donate money to a special fund. So if you donate money to the music ministry instead of just the general fund, it goes into these special accounts and requires special accounting transactions. That's why it's a special bucket of money, and then just a little bit of miscellaneous revenue. So mostly the increase in revenue comes from contributions because everyone has been extremely generous. So thank you very much for that. And then as of October 31st, we had expenses of $929,000. By this point in the year, we had budgeted to spend $869,000. So we have been spending a lot more than we planned to. So as you can see, again, from the pie chart, this is at the bottom. The expenses are mainly in 5 big areas. So the big blue area is facilities. So kind of everything for this building that comes from the operating budget, and then the 2 parsonages. Orange is personnel, so that is clergy and staff. Administration is kind of professional services, so that's the accountant, the copy machine, the things, supplies and whatnot live in that bucket. The yellow piece is apportionments, so this is what we pay as a church to support the Worldwide United Methodist Church, and then 5% is programming, so these would be the lovely flowers behind us, what we spend on Vacation Bible School. And so all of our expenses, kind of the over budget piece of our budget, they all come from facilities. We're doing very nicely on all the other lines. Facilities is tough. So we spent more than we budgeted in equipment maintenance, in utilities, in snow removal, in pest control. We had a mice problem this year, and in cleaning services. So as of October 31st, we had a deficit of $113,000. By this point in the year, we had budgeted to have a deficit of $99,599, and we had budgeted a deficit for the whole year of $100,000. So For all the deficit spending we said we could have, we spent that and an additional $13,000. So we do have the funds to cover that deficit in 2024, but we don't have that amount of funds to cover for a deficit in 2025. I wanted to talk a little bit about a piece of money that we rarely talk about, which is our endowment. So the church has kind of 3 sections of money. We have our operating budget and kind of the money that we take in and that goes out on a day-to-day basis. We have our capital reserves, and then we have an endowment. The endowment is not very large, and so we don't talk about it a lot, so I just wanted to give a brief update. It has about $330,000. So endowments are restricted by donors. So if you donate money into the endowment, we can only spend it by the terms of the endowment. We as a church, I think, in all of our pastoral and staff changes have struggled a bit with documentation. So we are now kind of working to get all of the documents and the ducks in a row with the endowment. There were several years where we did not spend any money from the endowment. So normally what you do with an endowment is you spend the earnings from the endowment or a percentage of the earnings. So this year, we updated our endowment agreement at the very strong request of our bankers. And we are working to update our investment policy statement, which says that this is how you can invest the funds in the endowment. And so the Leadership Council, acting as the endowment committee, approved taking $25,000 out of the endowment in order to pay for a special project to clean our gutters, because they had not been cleaned in a very long time. So this is not a huge piece of money, but just another piece of money that we are able to use with the intention, respects the intention of the donors. They did not give us money so that it could sit in a pot in the bank, and just another source of funds. So I think that's really exciting. It's all kind of administrative, but I'm happy about it. So I just wanted to mention that. So then kind of our other big piece of funds and savings is our capital expenses and our capital accounts. So these are separate from the operating budget. So everything on this pie chart does not apply with the capital budget. The capital expenses are kind of different. The operating budget is what you kind of think of when you think of the word budget. Capital are kind of big things, like if your refrigerator breaks at your house, you may not kind of budget for that on a monthly basis. So all of our capital expenses, our capital funds are tracked separately, and then our capital expenses are tracked separately. So we have money in our capital reserve. This came from the sale of the Marvin Memorial Building and the sale of the parsonage where Reverend Rachel lived. So we have been spending that money on a few big projects. So first is kind of the groundwork for the affordable housing project, and then in developing the master plan for the church. And then some of those funds will be reimbursed to the church. Second, on this master plan project that is currently underway that you can see in the hallways. Last month, the Leadership Council authorized spending up to $700,000 on that project. And then third, on renovations on the Dale Drive parsonage. So we're really blessed to be able to have these funds, but again, these funds can only be used on capital expenses. So it's really exciting to see the work in the church, and to think that this means that, and it's easy to think this means the church is doing really well, because we're like, oh, look at all of the stuff that's happening. But those funds live in a separate bucket, and we cannot use those funds to plug any holes in our operating budget. So next, I would like to talk about the 2025 operating budget. So the Budget and Operations Committee has been working with our accountant Julie for the last several months on preparing this budget. Our goal is to have the Leadership Council pass a budget at its next meeting on December 17th. So last year we developed values for our budget process. These are divided into two buckets, those that are financially / operationally focused and those that are ministry focused. So for financially and operationally focused, we want to be good stewards of our monetary resources. We want to be good stewards of our tangible assets like the building. We want to treat our staff well. We want to prioritize sustainability for future generations and to prioritize our affordable housing project. And then for ministry focus, we want to be welcoming to all God's people. We want to feed all God's people, body, mind, and spirit, to focus on children, families, and youth, and then our justice ministries. So the committee and Julie has been working really hard to understand the church's operating expenses. We are doing our best to predict our costs for 2025. Julie's working to estimate our utility costs. Pastor Will and Tracy have been working on service contracts, when they should be renewed, when they should be put out to bid, and when we should be contracting for different services. And then committee member Darren met with the staff to understand their budget needs and aspirations. But we're still struggling to gain a clear picture of the revenue side of the budget. So I have to admit that church budgeting is pretty tough because there is a lot of stuff that goes on in Q4. We're still collecting pledges for 2025. December is generally the church's best month financially, with special Christmas donations and year-end donations. Pastor Will just announced this morning that we received a new gift of $30,000. So we don't quite know where we're going to end the year, and then how much of the church's savings we're going to spend on that operating deficit. And then there are other unknowns that should come into sharper focus in Q1 of 2025. So we're still negotiating a few items with Christ Congregational. We are, as Pastor Will said at the beginning, we're cutting off part of the church as part of this big project, and that's going to reduce the utility bills. Still hard to figure out how to put that reduction into the budget. And then our annual wild card of snow removal. It is really hard to figure out, especially I think in the Mid-Atlantic, how much to budget on snow removal, and that can really blow the budget, and we should know that by March. You know, like we'll know if it snowed a lot and we had to spend a lot of money on that. So in 2024, we had $100,000 to budget for this deficit. We don't have that much money for 2025. We have a lot of open questions. So the Budget Committee has discussed this a lot. It's what we spend a lot of our meetings talking about. So we feel that the process that we used in 2024, where we just had one budget and we followed it throughout the year and we tracked it, that will be insufficient for 2025. 2025 is going to require a lot closer monitoring with thorough reviews and then potential adjustments to the budget, I think, each quarter. So if you have not already made your pledge for 2025, please consider doing so. And if you have the means to be generous this holiday season, please consider further donations to the 2024 operating fund to help offset our current deficit, supporting the love offering for church clergy and staff, and or contributing to our benevolence fund, which enables us to support members of the local community. So now I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Sorry if that was a bit dry. Finances often are.
What's the impact of Christ Congregational going to be on the budget for next year? What does it mean? What's the impact going to be of Christ Congregational on our budget for 2025? 2026, it's a 2-year lease.
I think I will give you a different answer than what Pastor Will give you. So maybe we can both answer. So I didn't talk about how in 2024 we lost some of our tenants. And this is one of the reasons why I think I did a poor job as your treasurer, and that we really should have looked at the budget in the middle of 2024. So then we replaced some of that by having, I'm going to forget his name again, the food bank come downstairs. But, thank you, Shepherd's Table. But then with Shepherd's Table, we increased the cleaning downstairs in order to make sure that we had a clean kitchen for Shepherd's Table and for the visitors. So if you look at the line, and Shepherd's Table reimbursed us, but so if you look at the line of how much money we take in facilities, it didn't, in facilities revenue, it didn't change that much, but we now have an additional expense of cleaning, which is being offset, but it's very difficult to kind of see if you're just looking at the top line numbers. So in bringing in Christ Congregational kind of fixes a lot of that. So from my perspective, like, I don't see a lot, because in some ways I see it as plugging some of the holes from 2024. But again, I think Pastor Will sees it a little differently.
Okay, I think it's a yes and thank you, Kyle, for turning my mic on. So, two things. There is a difference between rental income and missional partnerships. Our engagement with Shepherd's Table is a missional partnership that is not intended to produce revenue for the church, but is rather intended to help expand ministry at the church. The fees that Shepherd's Table pays helps to offset gas and cleaning expenses related to their occupancy in the building. That's all it does. We have other issues in our kitchen, which are separate from that, which have contributed to some of the overages in equipment maintenance, particularly related to our refrigerators and our stoves and ovens, which, to be clear, are also used by our ministries, like Vacation Bible School, like the mobile food pantry, etc. So those were expenses we would incur anyway. Christ Congregational's baseline rent, starting in January 31st of next year, is a total of $66,000 in the first year, with a built-in 5% increase in the following year. As is always the case in a building like ours, most of that is really just going to offset the costs of occupancy that come along with having more people in the building, right? More electrical use, more water use, more janitorial supply use, although there will be some filling of the gaps in our budget. We anticipate that will more than offset the lost revenue from our previous two congregations that we're renting, which, to be clear, were damaging our building in ways that we were having to repair anyway. So there are always costs and benefits to having renters in a space, particularly when you have renters that aren't respecting the space or taking care of the space well. And we have sufficiently high hopes that Christ Congregational will, because we're values aligned and vision aligned, help us better care for our facilities. Here's the other thing that I think is ongoing in conversation with Christ Congregational and is important to note. Two things. One, we're actively exploring potential personnel offsets, because we know that there are certain staff positions that will support the work of both congregations, particularly our operations manager. So there is an opportunity for additional revenue on top of that $66,000 to help offset current expenses related to our operations manager, as well as potential ministry partnerships, because we are values and vision aligned, which, to be clear, we have not been with other congregations to whom we have rented, to help offset program expenses. As an example, our Advent Festival today might be a program in 2025 we share, and therefore there would be an influx of both volunteer support and potential financial support to offset the expenses related with that event. Does that make sense? So there are some different opportunities available to us that are really not going to become clear until, as Lee was saying, that first quarter.
What is the reason for the fairly large increase in the apportionments? It goes from 72,900 to 87,500.
Probably me doing the graph incorrectly. So this is the annual budget. So we just haven't spent 87. So we've only spent 72,000 of the 87,000 to date. So the apportionments are another kind of tricky issue. So the conference sets what our apportionment should be. The conference would like us to be spending a lot more money than we are currently spending on apportionments. I think it is important that we as a congregation pay our apportionments because of the support that they provide worldwide and to our conference. They would like our apportionments to be significantly higher, and that is very difficult, I think, to do in any one year. So we are still trying to kind of increase them every year, but to increase them at maybe a slower rate than the conference would prefer.
So just to offer a bit of clarity about apportionments, particularly for those of us who've not been in the Methodist soup for a long time, apportionments are determined based upon a benevolence factor that's established by the annual conference's CFA, Committee on Finance and Administration, annually. That current benevolence factor is 17.265% of spending in a local church that is non-benevolent. So any facilities expenses, any program expenses, basically any personnel expenses, anything that you're spending that is not directly going to mission and service in your community, you pay 17.265 or whatever number I just was able to pull out of the back of my head. You pay that to the annual conference. 86 cents of every dollar that a church gives stays within the annual conference. So it pays our district superintendents, it pays our bishop, it provides programming for annual conference, it provides programming for all the legislative work that the conference does, it provides youth events and things like that. Historically, this congregation, over the last, if we were to take an aggregate of the last 2 decades, has not paid its apportionments in full, on average, more years than not. There was a brief period of time between 2015 and 2017 where we were paying at close to 100%. However, because of pastoral changes, because of a variety of things, in 2022 we only paid $50,000 of an approximately $108,000 apportionment ask from the conference. We made a commitment to pay more each year till we got to that number. Now here's the thing that's important for us to note. Every dollar we budget for facilities, or spend on facilities, on personnel, on program, goes towards determining what that number is going to be. And what they do is they take it from the previous year to determine the following year. It's part of the reason we've had such hard conversations about things like staffing and personnel, because every single dollar that goes into paying our staff counts towards that apportionment. And when those numbers shift downward, that apportionment number shifts downward. There is also some creative accounting, holy accounting that some churches engage in to help lower that apportionment number by accounting certain facilities expenses as benevolence expenses that we have not traditionally done because it, as your pastor, to me feels disingenuous to do that. So we've not. But we are actively working with the conference to help them understand that the majority of that now $120,000 apportionment. It was 125. We'll go back and take a look at that. The numbers went up significantly last year, in part because of the facilities expenses related to trying to kind of fix some things in the building that needed fixing. We're working with them now to help them understand the work that we've undertaken to reduce utilities expenses, to abandon a portion of the buildings, in an effort to try to get those payments lower. And the conference has been gracious in understanding that we're working towards paying that full apportionment. So both of those things are happening in tandem. We know that, and I know this is all boring, it's stuff that keeps me up at night, so now I'm glad I get to share it. Y'all get to shoulder it with me. We do anticipate that when we demolish that portion of the building and we build the housing back, we're looking at a reduction of at least 25%, perhaps more, of that overall apportionment cost, in part because our program expenses for a congregation our size are woefully small. 5% of $1 million budget for a congregation that serves 3,000 people a month and worships on average 280 people is unheard of in a lot of places. And so we will have to keep in mind that as we're looking at cost savings in some places, part of that really needs to be investment in program ministries, which will help us grow the church. And this is nobody asked this question, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The last thing I'll offer is this. We know that we adopted a deficit budget this year. Part of that was to increase staff salaries, which had not been increased in over 5 years, right? So no cost of living, no nothing for our staff. So we made the intentional effort and decision to do that this year and to increase our program budgets in 2024. And I want to flag that what we've seen because of that investment is a 13% increase in attendance, almost 5% increase in giving, the largest number of first-time pledgers in the last decade. For 2025, we've seen 23 new pledges. And so there are costs and benefits to some of these decisions, right? So the council and thankfully the Budget and Operations Committee have been very, very diligent in helping us consider all of these factors as we're trying to figure out how to move through this period really of growth and transition as a congregation.
Well, I think those were all great things for everyone to understand. Is there any further questions that we have? Okay, well, if not, thank you so much for spending part of your Sunday with us. We will now let everyone go to get to Maryland games and whatnot.
And as we're walking out, let me just invite us. If you have made a pledge, I invite you to talk to people you know about why you made a pledge and invite them to do the same. A pledge of $1 is as meaningful as a pledge of $10,000 because it helps us budget well. If you are looking to offset your tax burden for 2024, it doesn't even need to be for good intention. It can just be because you're trying not to pay Uncle Sam. We encourage you to consider making an end-of-year gift to help support our ministry. We'll use those dollars for lots of good. So I encourage you to invite your family to think about that and to invite other people in the congregation to think about that. And then finally, I want to invite you to be praying for our congregation as we move into 2025, both for our financial health and well-being, and for all the ways those dollars are going to be used to help continue feeding people mind, body, and spirit so that none go hungry. Those prayers are as valuable as every dollar and cent you give. And can we give Lee and the Budget and Operations Committee a round of applause because they're pretty amazing.